Hello, everyone. Welcome to this continuation of our discussion about business documentation. This is part two, where we're going to be talking about external documentation that you need to keep. As you recall, in part one, we talked about internal documents that you need for basically running your business. This particular lesson is going to be focused on dealing with customers, contractors, clients, vendors, anybody outside of your organization. So with that, I know this may not sound like something that's extraordinarily scintillating, if you will, but at the same time, it's something that some of these documents will be essential. Some of these will be maybe advisable. And then there are others that you just need to know about these on an ongoing basis, because you'll recall in one of my previous lessons, I said, I have a saying that's don't go into it, grow into it. Well, as you grow your business, some of these things will become a little more pressing, but I want to make you aware of them right from the very beginning. So with that, let's go ahead and do a quick overview of exactly what we're going to be getting into in this particular lesson. First of all, we're going to talk about sales contracts and service agreements. Then we're going to talk about vendor or contractor agreements. We're going to talk about privacy policies and terms of use. That's going to be primarily for your website, especially those of you that have web-based businesses. This will be a little more important for you than it will be for other people. So you're going to want to pay close attention to that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the dispute resolution process. When it comes to documentation, everything is about trying our best to make sure that we nip things in the bud, any problems, any potential conflict that comes up before it escalates to a point that it could be costly, not just with money, but also time, effort, energy, stress. So let's go ahead and get right into it by talking about sales contracts and service agreements. First of all, what are these? Basically, these are the contracts that we'll have between our company and our customers or clients. Now, anytime you sell something, typically you're going to have some sort of an agreement that outlines essentially your relationship. So that's going to be a sales order form for many people. Now, the way I like to really kind of explain this is that anytime you have a sales contract or a sales order form, on the front page, it's got a lot of the information as far as what took place with regard to the sale. This is going to be where maybe your name, address, phone number, contact information is on there. And then it's going to list out what is it that you're buying, what is included with what you're buying, how much does it cost, how did you pay. All of that will be taken care of on really the front page of the document. So that's what I explain to people, is that you need to have one of these, because this is how you'll keep up with, did somebody actually buy from you or did they not? Do they have a receipt? Because they may come in and say, hey, I want to return. If you're selling goods, they may say, hey, I want to return this. Well, they probably wouldn't have gotten the product or whatever it is that you may be selling unless they actually bought it. But it's always good to have a receipt and find out, well, when did they buy it? Because you may not be at a point where you have an elaborate customer relationship manager or CRM. You may not have all of the records in place when you're just getting started. Ideally, you're going to have good documentation, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. Sometimes we say, okay, we're so busy getting things started, and I hope this is the case for you, that you're so busy because you're making so much money and doing so much in sales that sometimes it can be a little overwhelming with the business documentation. Now, it may sound crazy that I say, I hope you get to that point, but what I mean by that is one of the biggest, most important things you could possibly have to ensure your success with your business is to build momentum. Well, you don't want to stop that momentum because something happened, that maybe you got sued or now you're having to deal with customer complaints or issues. The better job you do with your documentation, the less likely it's going to be that you have to deal with those things, especially on an ongoing basis. So that's why this is so important. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want to have to mess with all this documentation. I know it's not the funnest thing in the world, but it is fun? Cashing checks, making deposits, generating income, and all of the great things that you can do with that income once you've generated it. You want to make sure that you keep it, and this is going to help you to do that. So with these sales order forms, again, I say this is kind of the front page of the document. This is what is going to be printed on that sales order form, and now we get into the back page. That's going to be the terms and conditions. And generally, when you look at a sales order form, on the front of it, you're going to see it's going to be a larger font probably. On the back side, that's where it's going to be the fine print. that's what this is. The terms and conditions. This is the fine print that basically says, all right, here's how the service will be provided. Here are some of our disclaimer language. Here's going to be some of the things, a process for how you're going to essentially provide that service. How is it offered? Are there limitations on it? Or are there any things that, that really the customers or clients need to know? It should all be listed out as much as possible as far as governing this transaction. It should be basically outlined in those terms and conditions. Well, it should answer any questions that come up. So if somebody says, hey, you know what? How do I contact somebody if I have a problem? Well, that contact information should be on there. Well, who do I contact if I just have a question about it? Is there customer support? Is that provided or is it not? Well, they need to know these things. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into the dispute resolution process portion of this particular lesson. But for now, I just want to make sure that you understand the better job you do of putting information on that backside of your order form, the less challenges you're going to have, the less difficulties, and hopefully, like I said earlier, it nips those possible complaints in the bud before they ever start blossoming up. So we've got to make sure that we have this, and everybody's is going to be a little bit different. Now, you may be able to borrow some language, maybe from some other sample agreements, but because we're talking about you and your unique business, hey, you may have your own way of doing things. Just because somebody else offers something in a certain way doesn't mean that you have to follow them to the T. It's your business. It can be your rules. Now, what you may find is that this will grow along with your business. You may start off and you say, you know what? Here's what I want to do. I'm going to offer, if anybody ever asks me for a refund, boom, automatically they get it. Well, as your business grows, you may find out that you end up having what I refer to as shoplifters. Now, when I say shoplifters, a lot of times I'm not necessarily meaning they come into your store and they steal stuff. What I mean is that they purchase your product, they purchase your service with the full intention of returning it. So what they're doing basically is they're trying to say, okay, I'm just going to get the product. Maybe I'll make a copy of it and then I'll return it back. Well, that may challenge your unlimited no refund or absolute refunds under all circumstances. Well, you may decide, all right, hold on a second. We're getting killed here because all these shoplifters are coming in and taking advantage of us. Well, that doesn't mean that you need to let the pendulum swing all the way to the other side where you say absolutely zero refunds. No, but there needs to be kind of a nice balance where you're able to explain, how do you get a refund? Under what circumstances will we issue a refund? What is our policy on that? And we're going to talk about that in just a moment in more detail, but these are things that you need to be thinking through. And I know this is not the type of thing you want to think about when you're first starting your business. A lot of times you're thinking about all of the great things that you'll be able to provide and all the money that you're going to make. But the reality comes in, and as I've said in previous lessons, it's been said that there are two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. Well, to that, I would add the possibility, if not the probability, of conflict when two or more people are interacting with one another. Well, hopefully you're interacting with other people through customers and clients. If not, your business is in trouble. So we've got to make sure that we have some sort of a plan in there. That's where this needs to be documented. And we're going to talk about how it's conveyed to your customers and clients in just a moment. But for now, just understand, you need to be thinking through how the transactions will take place. How will they be governed? What are the terms and conditions of your sale, of the product, the service, whatever it is that you're offering? You want to make sure that that's clearly laid out. That's what this portion is about. Now, the next thing is you need to have on there clearly stated, what is your refund policy? We just talked about this, but there needs to be a separate section that just says, in the event that you would like to cancel your service, here's how it works. It may be that if they're buying a book, if they've written in the book, sorry, no refunds after that point. It may be something that you say, hey, if you've already used this and it's not suitable to be resold, then maybe there's no refund. Or maybe it's something that, hey, if they genuinely had a problem with this, then hey, of course we want to give them a refund. If it gave them any sort of problems whatsoever, absolutely we want to refund them their money. but we've got to make sure that we have this. Now, that being said, I'm going to tell you something right now. There may be times, no, fact is, I'll say there will be times. There will be times that you know with absolute certainty that somebody is taking advantage of you and they are just returning this and they've already used it and they're just taking advantage of you. Well, I'm going to tell you something right now that can save you truly thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that is, if you are dealing with somebody that you feel like is probably a problem person, give them their money back. I promise you it'll be the cheapest money you ever spent, because not only would I say give them their money back, do an added bonus. Say, tell you what, keep the product, keep the service. That's yours. We're sorry you had a bad experience. Here's your money back. Because what happens when somebody gets upset about maybe their interaction with you and they feel like they were treated improperly, it doesn't matter if they really were treated improperly. If they feel like they were treated improperly, people generally will share that experience. You know, it's funny that people don't share their positive experiences nearly as much as they will share those negative experiences. And they will just, I mean, you know, there's a saying in the Bible, a verse in the Bible that says, hell hath no fury like that of a woman scorned. Well, I'm not going to touch that. But what I will say, from a business standpoint, hell hath no fury like that of a customer scorned. If they feel like they have been somehow not treated properly the way they think they need to be treated, they will just go crazy and they can sometimes just burn you down. You want to make sure that you get those people out of your life, whatever it takes, and just say, you know what? Apparently this doesn't work. Let's move forward. Now, I know I may be digressing a bit as far as what we're talking about with business documentation, but I'm telling you right now, that's one of the best lessons I could possibly give you, because I have seen circumstances where an entire company was taken down because of one disgruntled customer. Don't let it happen to you. Be sure to just give them their money back, because I promise you, again, it'll be the best money you ever spent. Now, with that, let's go on to the vendor and contractor agreements. Now, with the sales and service agreements, what we're talking about is our interaction between our company and the customers and clients, as I mentioned. Here, we're talking about basically, these are contracts with other companies. And when I say other companies, it may just be somebody that's providing a service to you. Now, whether that service is, okay, maybe we're hiring somebody to come in and install lighting in our office, or we're coming in and we're having somebody set up our computer systems, or they're setting up a database for us. They're working on our CRM. They're doing things like this. You know, whatever it is, when you're working with independent contractors, it's always best to have some sort of documentation in place that outlines the scope of that relationship. And really, that's what we're talking about. We're outlining the relationship terms. How is this going to work? What is it that you're providing to me, and what are you expecting in return for this? This needs to be documented, because so many times I see people do business on a handshake. And, you know, it's kind of sad that we can't do that nowadays. But as a lawyer, I'm telling you, it's always best to get it in writing, because people can promise things. People can assure you of things. People can state things at the very beginning, and then later, their memory has, you know, a tendency to fade. So, well, I didn't say that. No, I would have never said that. I would never offer that. Well, how do they prove that you know they didn't say it, or how do you prove that they did say it? You can't. The only way to really prove this when you come back is to say, hey, you know what? Here it is in writing. That's your signature. That's my signature. That's what we agreed to. You see, that is what's going to govern in the event that this gets, if it escalates to a level of maybe a lawsuit or anything like that, the court is going to want to see the documentation. And if you don't have any documentation, then it becomes a he said, she said, and it's not going to bode well for you. The reality is, always get it in writing, because now, does that mean that they're always going to comply? No, but at least now you have a better leg to stand on in the event that you need to take things to the next level. If it escalates to, you know, depending upon what your dispute resolution process or policy says, you know, that will determine if whether you're going through negotiation, mediation, arbitration, or if it gets to litigation. And we're going to be talking about all these in more detail. But for now, just understand, I want you to make sure that you truly comprehend the importance of this. And the times that I've seen people get burned, and maybe even gotten burned myself, is when somebody says, "Oh, no, we'll take care of it," and you don't get it in writing. And sometimes, I'm just going to tell you, sometimes it may feel awkward. Say, "Okay, great, I'm going to need you to sign this agreement." That's okay. Here's what I would do. I would blame it on your lawyer. Say, "Hey, I'm sorry, our lawyer just requires us to do this." Right now, let's presume that I'm your lawyer. While we don't have an attorney-client relationship right now, just refer to me as your lawyer because I'm the one that trains you on this stuff. So basically, you can just say, "Hey, my lawyer told me that I always have to get things in writing. I'm sorry, he's a pain. I'm fine with that. But what I want you to do is, I'd much rather you have the pain right there than have the pain on the backside of the overall transaction." Hopefully that makes sense to you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is this is going to govern the enforcement of that contract. Again, when we talk about going through the court system or through any sort of litigation for that lawsuit, well, whether it actually gets to a trial or whether it's, is just settled, you will be in a much better position if you have the documentation, because this is going to show, here's what was expected, here's what we have contractually obligated ourselves to do. So we want to make sure that we have that we can refer back to and rely upon when that time comes. And notice I said when that time comes, I didn't say if. There will always be some sort of a challenge. It's not a matter of if it'll arise, it's a matter of when. Now, the next thing is, it's going to make sure we explain the termination and cancellation policy. Can you get out of this contract? Under what circumstances? How does this work? If I'm entering into a contract, I want to make sure that I have some sort of understanding of, hey, if this doesn't go the way that I want it to go, can I get out of this, or am I obligated to pay even if I didn't get what I thought I contracted for? This is something that you definitely want to make sure that there's a good understanding. The better job you do on the front end, and the better, essentially agreement that you can come to with the other party, the better the overall relationship is going to be. I promise you that. So do what it takes. Even though it may seem like it's a lot of time, effort, energy, it's well worth it. Well, now let's take a look at one thing real quick. The dispute resolution process is something we're going to talk about is a completely individual part of this lesson, because it's that important. But there should be at least some sort of a dispute resolution clause, provision, or you're probably not going to have room for the entire policy, but you can at least have that clause or that provision in there. We'll talk about our overall process in just a moment. But for now, let's take a look at another thing that you're going to need, and that is privacy policies and terms of use. This is talking in particular about on your website. Now, depending upon how involved your website is in your business, that will determine how much of a privacy policy you need and how complex your terms of use need to be. So let's think about it this way. If I just have a website, because let's say as an attorney, I've got a website, and I just say, hey, if you'd like to work with me and have me represent you, here's how it works, call me. Well, I'm not going to need to have a whole lot of privacy and a whole lot of terms of use on my website, because all I'm doing is providing information. I may have little things that say, hey, there's no guarantees of an outcome in this, whether it's a lawsuit or whether it's just representation, period. We want to make sure that we don't over promise and then have the potential for the other party to feel like we under-delivered. So we want to make sure that we have something in there that just has maybe some disclaimer language. Also, that if they are providing any sort of information, that we let them know that, hey, we're not going to share your information. That information is just for our purposes so that we can reach out to you. You are now asking us to contact you. So the better job you do with that, the better the overall experience of the user, the potential customer, the potential prospect, whoever that may be that's coming to the website. Now, let's compare and contrast that for just a moment and say, let's say that your business is a website, and what you offer is maybe information products. Let's say that you are offering, one of the things that I do in working with clients is that I offer, consulting, training, educational videos that people pay for. So if I'm providing that through a website and I'm explaining all these things, there needs to be more expansive privacy policies. There needs to be a more expansive terms of use on the website, because they understand that the product that they are purchasing is the use of that website. So that makes it a bit more, a bit more prominent of the overall transaction. The website is. So we've got to make sure that we have a little more detailed information when it comes to that. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, let me explain to you. I say this is advisable for websites. Now, even if you have just a website that is purely informational, maybe it's a one-page website that just says, hey, here's our information. If you want to learn more, give us a call. Well, great. Maybe you've answered a lot of the questions there. So you're not going to need as robust of an overall offering when it comes to your privacy policies and your terms of use. But again, if your website, and that's why I say advisable, it's not essential. Now, if your business is purely that website, it's going to be essential. But as I said from the outset of this entire lesson, there are going to be some things that we talk about that are just advisable, some things that are essential, but then there are some things that, I just want you to know about these so that as you grow your business, you'll be aware of them and you'll look back at this and say, oh yeah, I remember he shared that with me. He taught me that. Now it's time to take some action on that. And basically, it explains the policies for the website use. This is where you're going to have disclaimers to make sure that they are not saying, okay, I read it on your website. Now I'm going to take that as gospel and I'm going to implement that. Whenever I'm providing legal advice, I have to make sure that people understand that there is a difference between general and specific. Let me give you a quick illustration on that. A lot of times I may make a statement and yeah, that is kind of a general rule, but it doesn't apply in every specific situation because there are always exceptions. Well, if you take what I addressed to somebody in the exception and then you say, okay, well, I'm going to apply that as the general rule, that doesn't work either. So on a website like that, you need to make sure that you have some sort of disclaimer that says, hey, we do not, we do not guarantee the results of anything, of the outcome of our representation. We want to make sure that, hey, your circumstances are unique and every situation is different. As such, we have a different approach to every situation, every circumstance. So make sure that they understand that. That's something that you're going to definitely want to think through and make sure you have as part of this process. Now, the next thing, generally you can use template language here, especially if we're talking about just something that's an informational website. If the website is your service, you're going to need to get a lot more detailed. However, if you just have something that's information, how to contact you, just kind of answer some questions about your service and then guides them to maybe contact you, I'm just going to tell you, this is me as an attorney telling you that it doesn't have to be overly specific in that particular instance. Now, see, that's a great example of what I just shared with you. If I said, hey, you can just, notice I said can generally use template language. I didn't say in all instances you're going to use template language. So the general is that you could, but specifically if you're in this particular type of business, oh no, you need to get more detailed. Well, if you heard me say that you need to be more detailed and you say, well, I've just got a business that has a website that has general information, you can't apply that either. So that's what I mean here when I'm talking about, sure, you could apply just boilerplate language. It's not going to really matter in some instances. Now, if you want to find out, am I operating a business that needs more detailed information? That's where you need to contact the attorney. Make sure that you have the specific information for your specific situation. Now, this is also going to help protect against website user complaints. I know that it seems like I'm always talking about conflict and disputes arising and challenges. Well, guys, I'm an attorney. That's what I do. Sure, we all want to think about our business on all the positive things, but to me, I look at it like this. In sports, you need a good offense, but you also need a good defense. Well, a lot of different strategies that you may be employing may be incredible for generating income, for getting sales, for generating that revenue. But what happens as far as keeping it? That's the defensive. That's why when we talk about lawsuit protection, we talk about income tax protection, we talk about death tax protection with the estate planning, these are all things that have to be factored in. Sure, I promise you there will be complaints. Now, does that mean that every single day your entire business is going to be dealing with complaints? I certainly hope not. But I will tell you, the better job you do of this overall process, the better and more smoothly your business will run, and you're not having to deal with this over and over and over again. Let's take a look at that. When I say it's easy to implement, this is not something that needs to be overly complex. Now, again, if your business is the website and you're actually everything that you're offering is through that website, it's going to be a lot more complex. But overall, I'd say this right here is going to be easy to implement, and it's going to be generally inexpensive. Sure, if you need a more expansive, terms of service and policy, privacy policies, yeah, you may want to hire a lawyer to do that. But if it's just general information, you could just find something and just kind of, you don't want to just plagiarize it, but you can say, okay, here's the gist of things. Let me just kind of reword it. And that's not going to be a problem. Hopefully that is helpful to you. And hopefully that kind of eases your mind a little bit, because sometimes people hear about this documentation and they start freaking out. They start thinking to themselves, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? I don't even think I want to have this business anymore. That is certainly not my intention. I want to do everything I can to raise those potential, I'm going to call them obstacles. Now, I'm not going to say that it is a problem, but it's just going to be an obstacle. Obstacles are made to be overcome. So it's just, sometimes we may just sidestep certain things. Some things we may just hop right over them. Some things we may have to climb over because they're bigger obstacles. Either way, part of my job is to make sure that I provide you with the information that you need and the strategies that you need to overcome those obstacles. That's what this lesson is all about. That's what everything we do is all about for you. Now let's take a look at that dispute resolution process. Now, as you've probably gathered, if you've watched some of the other lessons to this point where I've been providing different guidance and strategies and information on how this all works, you know that I'm a pretty big proponent of making sure that you have some sort of a dispute resolution process in place for your business. Now, there are going to be various components to that. And the various components kind of start with the easiest and they work their way up to the most difficult. And to me, the more you can get done at these first stages, the better it's going to be. So let's take a look at it. When I say the first thing is communication, it's important that you communicate how this relationship is going to work. When somebody is saying, I'm going to do business with you, what does that look like? Because conflict is a result of people having a certain expectation and then feeling like their expectation was not met. Now, sometimes customers, clients may say, okay, you know what, they didn't meet it. I learned my lesson. I just won't do business with them ever again. Well, we don't want that. We'd rather make sure that we have repeat customers. But there are also times where a customer can say, you know what, I had a certain expectation. They promised me this, and that wasn't even close to what I thought I was getting. Well, obviously, that's not going to be ideal either. So the better job you can do from the very beginning of explaining exactly, here's what my product is, here's what it does, here's how it can benefit you. And you provide, okay, here's what it's not. And if you're looking to use it for this, don't use it for this. Well, now you've clearly communicated that to them. So first of all, it's going to be what you say. Well, you may be thinking to yourself, hey, earlier you said it doesn't matter what you say, it's all what's in writing. Well, guess what? That's the next part of the process, documentation. You know, we can say all of the things, but if it's not in writing, it doesn't matter. Well, I think these two components work hand in hand, because let's say that you've got employees, you've got salespeople. They need to know what your process is. They need to know what your policies are. They need to know, the more information they have, the better job they can do explaining it. When I say documentation, I'm not just talking about contracts. I'm not talking about, the terms of service and the terms and conditions and all of this. Sometimes your documentation is just, maybe it's your company brochure. Well, that brochure may be on your website. essentially this is going to be written out so that if anybody raises an issue about certain things, you can say, well, did you read the website? Did you read the sales order form? Did you read the contract? Did you talk to our salesperson? Because all of those things will lay out clearly what the person can expect through this transaction. So that's where documentation and communication kind of work hand in hand with one another so that everything works as smoothly as it possibly can. Now, does that mean it's always going to be perfectly smooth? Of course not. But now let's take a look at where we start getting into how are we going to resolve some of these complaints, conflicts, disputes. Maybe people just griping about certain things. Hey, we've got to recognize that this is just part of it when you have a business. So how do we do it? Well, you need to be really good at negotiation. Now, typically people will think negotiation, okay, so I drive a hard bargain and I'm going to be able to beat somebody down on their price. And that's not what negotiation is all about. Negotiation is about essentially working with another party to form in my opinion, a win-win scenario so that both parties feel like this was a good transaction. That's what negotiation is all about. Now, whether it's on the front end when we're negotiating, are we going to move forward with this product? Are we going to move forward with this service? Are we going to move forward with just this relationship? Or it could be on the back end where we say, okay, my understanding is that you are unhappy, you're dissatisfied, you feel like you did not get what you thought you were going to get, your expectations were not met. Well, now we negotiate how we're going to handle things. In some companies, they'll say, tell you what, why don't you keep that product and I'll send you another one? Or maybe that's an example, but it could be, tell you what, keep that, we'll give you your money back. Sometimes it'll be like, tell you what, why don't you return the product, and once you return it, as long as it's in good condition, we'll give you your money back. Sometimes it may be absolutely not. I'm not going to give you your money back because it was clearly stated that you paid for this, I provided you this, absolutely provided you what it says we provided you with, and no, there are no refunds. Well, we've got to negotiate. And again, remember earlier where I said, if it gets to a point where you can tell that this person may be a thorn in your side and could be that person that takes down your entire business because they get disgruntled and they're going to tell the world about it, and then they're going to contact regulatory authorities. They're going to put a negative review for you on the Better Business Bureau. They're going to put a negative Yelp review for certain things. They're going to put they're going to lambast you all over the internet. Give them their money back. Let them keep whatever they got. Let them feel like they got one over on you. Great. We don't care. But part of the negotiation process is being able to identify how this is all working. Is this somebody that is open to negotiation? And when I say, how do we tell if somebody's open to negotiation? Well, I believe that we can kind of look at it. Some people take a competitive approach where they're only happy if they feel like they won. But what we're trying to do is what I'll refer to as a collaborative approach, where we're saying, hey, let's work together to come up with a solution. Let's work together to come up with some sort of an arrangement that is going to make both of us, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're both going to be happy, but at least we are satisfied. We feel like, okay, this is not my ideal situation, but it's also a lot better than it could have been. Sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes it's just compromise. And that's fine. Don't feel like, no, negotiation is a win, at all cost, imperative. No, it doesn't have to be like that. So make sure that you just have some sort of negotiation skills, and you will develop these over the course of your business. Some people have these going into it, and that's why they started their own business. Other people have to kind of do OJT, on the job training, where we start looking at it and say, hey, I wasn't a good negotiator, but wow, I've had to be in some negotiations that have kind of honed my skills. Well, that's great. But remember, negotiation can end up saving you a lot of money because it's going to save you a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, and a lot of headache if it gets to an elevated state. What do those elevated states look like? Well, the first one is mediation. Now, mediation is of all of our different options, mediation is probably the easiest to go through, and it could be the cheapest. And when I say that, I'm talking about of the formal processes. While this is a formal process, it is not formal from the standpoint of legally binding in most circumstances. Typically, mediation is where we come together. Let's say we try to negotiate amongst ourselves and we were making no headway. We're just butting heads and we just realized, hey, this is not going anywhere. Well, that's where we have a third party that serves as the mediator that says, hey, you know what? You have this position, you have this position. I'm going to utilize my mediation skills to try to bring us together to a mutually acceptable solution. Now, I didn't say a mutually, well, it's mutually agreeable, mutually acceptable. I didn't say mutually, fully embraced and loved decision. No, we may get there, but at the same time, we may not. What you find is when you work with somebody that has mediation skills, that has mediation experience, they may be able to take emotion out of it. Because sometimes when we have any sort of dispute or conflict, sometimes those emotions are so raw that we can't even think clearly. We can't think rationally. That's why, where we say cooler minds prevail, that's what we want to have in our mediator. So with that, we can, through that mediation process, we can come to a point where we say, okay, I can sign off on this. Let's move forward. Or it may get to the point where we say, you know what, mediation didn't help. Now we've got to go to things that are a bit more formal because these could be legally binding once it gets to arbitration. Now, arbitration isn't, we're not necessarily going to the court system because it hasn't gotten to the level of a lawsuit, but arbitration, typically what you're going to find, if you look at the terms and conditions and the finer print in almost any contract, promise you there's going to be a dispute resolution provision or a clause. It's generally found at the back of the contract, and it's going to tell you disputes will be resolved in the following manner. Now, sometimes it'll say negotiation. Sometimes it'll say negotiation, then mediation. Sometimes it'll just say mediation. Typically, the most common is an arbitration clause. And what this says is that before you file a lawsuit, by signing this contract, you are agreeing to go through enforceable, legally binding arbitration before you can sue. So if somebody sues you under this, your first defense is, no, I have an arbitration clause in that agreement. You've agreed to go through arbitration. Now, in the arbitration, we've got to determine, is it going to be one arbitrator? Is it going to be three arbitrators? What rules are going to apply? Is it going to be JAMS? Is it going to be the American Arbitration Association? And then even when we choose what organization, sometimes there will be expedited rules. There'll be a streamlined process. This is where, this is something I work with people on pretty regularly, of making sure that we have the right language in place of how is our dispute resolution going to be handled. I'm just telling you right now, the better job you do, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it's because it's that important that's why I keep saying it over and over again. The better job you do on the front end, the less headache you'll have on the back end. Now, finally, we have litigation. Now, I hope it doesn't get to that point. But if it does, we've got to make sure that we utilize strategies. We've talked in other lessons about limited liability protection through our business structure. Well, once things get to this point, you absolutely, positively better have some sort of limited liability protection in place because you set up that limited partnership. You set up the limited liability company. You set up the corporation, the S corporation. Go back and review that lesson. If you haven't implemented your plan right now, you're going to want to review that and make sure that you make your choice for what type of business structure you need in place. And then we're going to take things to another level in another one of our lessons where we talk about specifically additional asset protection. That's where I'm going to talk to you about how many entities do you need? How do we basically follow a concept that I refer to as isolation and insulation? What are we going to do from an estate planning standpoint? All of that is going to be in that lesson called additional asset protection planning. But for now, let's just focus on what we've talked about through this particular lesson, and that is the business documentation for external interactions. Well, let's go through a quick summary. We talked about sales contracts and service agreements. Short story here. Basically, this is what we're talking about with our customers, clients, whoever we're dealing with as far as from that standpoint. Then we get into the vendor and contractor agreements. This is other companies that are providing services, whether it's maybe a supplier that you have, or maybe it's somebody that's providing a service for you, or maybe a service that you then offer for your clients. You want to make sure you have an agreement for that. Then we talk about the privacy policy and the terms of use. These are vitally important, especially if your website is your business. I don't know what type of business you have right now, but you want to think about this. How involved is your website in your overall business? The greater the level of involvement in your business of that website, the greater the need for very customized terms of use and privacy policies. And then finally, we've got our dispute resolution process that we talked about quite a bit. And again, it's not a matter of if disputes will arise, it's a matter of when. And you want to make sure that you have a plan in place to make sure that those are accurately, adequately, sufficiently addressed to make sure that your business continues on. And if we lose a customer, so be it. We don't want to lose our entire business. We're going to always do what we can to make the relationships and make the interactions and the transactions work as smoothly as possible. But conflict always pops up every now and then. So we've got to make sure that we've got a plan in place for how that's going to be handled. Do yourself a favor and make sure that you watch this video again. Not just this video, but all of the videos in the Savvy Startup series, because you are getting access to some incredible information. And these are not just lessons. These will be resources that you'll use through your entire career. That's why we provided the Savvy Startup video series. We want to make sure that you are ready and that you have everything you need to maximize your profits and cover your assets.